Hey everyone, welcome back. Starting a new project today. Actually going to try and fit that Coyote motor right here into this Ranger. Basically I've had this motor in for a while, but only been driving it this summer. And even before I had this thing up and running, I've always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to put that Coyote motor in this truck, because I think it would be just a blast to drive. It'd be kind of fun to try and shoehorn it in here. So we're going to try and start that today. Basically picked up an F-150 Coyote motor. Waiting for a front cover for it, because I think the accessory drive is going to be a little bit of a nightmare maybe to try and figure out where everything is going to be sitting. So I'm going to be switching to a Mustang style front cover. The front covers are slightly different between the F-150 and the Mustangs. So we're kind of waiting for that. Otherwise, pick that up. Kind of gone through the motor a little bit just to kind of freshen it up and make sure everything's okay in there. Got a 6R80 that I'm going to be putting in there. So I picked one of those up. Actually picked up a shifter out of an F-150, there's a torque converter there. So got most of the big parts. Biggest thing is, will it fit? Or how much, butchery am I going to have to do to make this thing fit? And trying to been doing as much homework as I can to make sure it's going to fit. And there's a couple things that basically are going to be my sticking points, I guess. Biggest thing that I run into now is I've always wanted to put a power steering rack and pinion on this thing, just to get this gearbox out of here, this manual gearbox out of the way. It creates a lot more room down this corner. But with a twin I-beam setup, like most of these Fords have, it wouldn't work to put a rack and pinion on, just because the passenger side pivot point is way over here on this frame rail, and vice versa. The driver's side pivot point is over here on this side of the frame rail. So you would have a lot of bump steer if you were to install one. You could probably get away with it, but man, it just wouldn't work out right. You probably wouldn't like how it drives. So the biggest thing is, if I can get rid of this gearbox, steering gear I should say, that'll create a lot more room down in this area for that engine, because I think the alternator or the power steering pump will be mounted here on the Coyote motor. The other thing is going to be headers. I don't know what we're going to end up doing there. We'll end up having to see how that thing fits in here first, and then my steering. Where the steering shaft comes out is right there. Just kind of eyeballing it. That motor is about as wide as these frame rails are. So that frame rail sits here and that shaft sticks out right there. I don't know if the exhaust manifold will hit it. I don't know if the heads themselves will hit it. They might be up higher than that. So I might have to make custom exhaust manifolds. Maybe I can just shift the motor over just a little bit to clear that. I don't know. That might be interesting. I might end up having to move that, modify that shaft and move it up closer so I can shimmy it over a little bit and then back and then down to the rack and pinion. Or if I'm going to have to put some sort of swivel inside the Firewall and come out a little bit, I can kind of angle that shaft down closer to the frame rail on the inside, so I might have to put a different plate there. I don't know how much modifying of the Firewall I'm going to have to do either with that, and also with the 6R80 going in there. The 6R80, as far as I can tell, is pretty similar size. The flywheel size I think is smaller than this AOD that's in here, because this is a 164 tooth AOD, so it's a little bit bigger diameter I think. But it's, I think, taller You know, the pan and stuff, everything is kind of a little bit smaller than an AOD, but kind of from here on up, it's a little bit wider. I think the AOD kind of drops down a little bit more there, but once we get everything out and kind of can measure things up, we'll be okay. So that's one job today, is I'm gonna yank the motor and tranny out of here. Because one thing I think, as far as putting a rack and pinion on here, what I want to do is take this twin I-beam off of here, unless it fits, but I'm highly doubting it's going to fit. But I think I want to put like a Mustang 2 style independent front suspension on here. So all of that front suspension would be gutted. You know, I'll have to pull the inner fenders here a little bit. But I'm going to have to pull all that out, and to get an IFS, I'm going to have to measure it. I'm going to have to, and I can't with that motor in the way, because I'm going to have to figure out how wide it is, right where the center line of the axle would be. So once the motor's out and kind of inner fenders and stuff are out of the way, I can kind of get a better measurement of what I'm going to need. Been kind of talking to Power by the Hour as far as, you know, how this is going to fit in here, and also Scott's Hot Rods. Been talking to them a little bit about that suspension, and if they could make me a kit that would, you know, kind of weld in here. So once this motor's out, I can get to that as far as measuring the front suspension and stuff, and you know, we'll see what happens. It shouldn't take me that long to pull the motor and tranny out, probably a couple hours, maybe do a little timeline of that too, and get that off, get the hood off. I've kind of started doing some stuff already, getting the, you know, little things pulled off. You can even see I got the brake booster pulled out of here. I'm going to switch to a Hydro Boost just to get more valve cover clearance, and it should be okay here. I got to pick that up, but so that's one more reason I'll need power steering on this thing, is just to help run the rack and pinion and hopefully the Hydro Boost. We'll see if this all works out. This may turn into an absolute nightmare, and I may end up, you know, wrecking this truck or something. I don't know, making it worse than what it was before. So I guess stick along with me and see if this thing goes the way I want it to. If it does, man, this is going to be a blast. So it's just get this stuff out. And I should point out one other thing too, is this air box, heater box I should say, will be probably in the way of the valve cover and the heads on that. You know, it's already been notched a little bit for this small block, so I don't know if I'm going to notch it more. I'm not too worried about that. We'll see how that ends up, but I think I should be okay there. Otherwise, yeah, I think this will be a fun project. Definitely challenging. I've never done anything quite this intense before, or this in depth, with swapping and, you know, front suspension and all that. So I've been doing some measurements, you know, just trying to figure out kind of where the center line of the axle is in the fender, and doing as much as I can, taking measurements of what the ride height is and all that stuff before taking everything apart. Because once you start pulling the engine out, obviously the weight is different. It's going to sit higher, and you know, suspension geometry might move a little bit once you take the wheels and stuff off. So trying to get as many measurements as I can before really taking everything apart and taking a lot of weight out of it, and hopefully I get, you know, do the best I can, or it works out. So we'll get started here, get pulling some of this stuff off, get the tranny out first probably, and then get the motor. Like I said, it shouldn't take me that long, so stay tuned. Alright, engine's out. Got it on the cart so I can wheel it around. Tranny's out too. Got that on a little cart so I can push that around too. So it didn't take terribly too long. Made a giant mess though. Got antifreeze all over the floor, so I gotta clean that up down here. I'm kind of soaking some of that stuff up. But yeah, you can see it's a fair amount of room here, but I got to take the motor mount brackets off yet. The engine harness down here, I got to try and fish that out of the firewall. The ECM is mounted on the back side or on the inside of the firewall there. So I got to try and remove a lot of that stuff. Some of the other wiring, got the radiator hose and stuff like that. Oil filter lines. Got the coil here, the inner fenders I got to take off yet. Throttle cable I can move, you know, that's going to be right in the way of the head will be right in the way of that anyway, plus we're going to throttle by wire, so that'll all can come out. So I'm going to try and simplify as much as I can out of this, and I'm going to have to start taking some measurements here, so I can try and figure out if suspension will work on here. Also, once I get some of this stuff cleaned up, then I'm going to try and see if I can set the engine in here. So here's a comparison of the two transmissions. This would be the 6R80. This would be the AOD. They're very kind of close in size. They both kind of measure roughly 19 inches wide. This one's kind of shaved down in this area here, but basically 19 out to that little tab there. So they're about the same width. I thought this AOD was going to be bigger height-wise. From the bell housing, it's roughly 16 and a half to the top to the bottom, or this one is 17. So they're very close in size. I should be fine with those. You know, this one's sitting a little bit lower because it's on the little cart there, and that one's on that foam there, but they're pretty close to the same size. You can see the AOD sticks out with the tail shaft quite a bit further. Probably a good 6 inches or so more. The cross member looks like it's going to be very close, or just have to be back a little ways, depending on how the bracket is. And as far as the width of the pan is pretty close to the same size. The only real difference we're going to have is the 6R80 is quite a bit, I don't want to say quite a bit I guess, but it's a lot wider right in this area compared to this one. It's a little skinnier, and then you can maybe see a little bit this part ramp of the transmission or backbone is up a little bit higher. Let's see if I can kind of get down this way. You know, here this one drops off quite a bit and then levels out, where that one's a nice gradual ramp all the way to the back. I think everything is just a little bit beefier through here, so that's the biggest difference. And I did have room on top of the transmission with this AOD, and I guess depending on how I mount the rear cross member on the transmission, whether that's up or down a little bit, that'll help give me extra room. But if I need any room or any clearance, it's going to be probably right in this area here, where I might have to raise the floor just a little bit, or you know, cut out a piece and redo the floor or the firewall just to get some room there. So that looks promising, but until we get the engine sitting in there and everything, we won't know. So all right, I got the front cover back on this thing, or the new one. So I want to test fit this engine in there, so I'm going to get the cherry picker hooked up and we'll see how this thing fits in here, how much I got to trim out, or if it's going to be a major deal or not. So it fits about as I expected, basically. Pretty wide. You know, length front to back is a little bit shorter, but this is one problem. We have our steering column that hits the head. This engine will sit lower once I get it back further, so that steering column will even hit the head further up. So I'm either going to have to shorten that up, move it. I think basically that big tube is the biggest problem. The shaft might clear once we get everything clearanced or whatever, but I might be able to shift that tube down as long, you know, with the motor going down. So I'll pull the steering column next, kind of to make more room there, and then we'll figure that out from there. You know, the other issue here is we have, let me see if I can get this in there. Basically the steering gearbox here is going to hit where the alternator or the power steering pump sits, depending on what you put there. It hits that front cover. If you can see that right here. Once the engine sits down further, I may need to trim the frame a little bit, notch the frame right here. I think if I get it back far enough where that steering gear sits, it'll probably clear, but I don't think the power steering pump, if I put it on this side, will be as big as the alternator will be. But one thing with this Mustang front cover is it brings the alternator up more, which then it could hit this corner of the frame rail, whereas the F-150, it sits down lower, so it's a little bit further down towards the center line of the crank, so it'll actually sit in further in the frame and probably give me more clearance. So there's a chance I may have to go back to the other front cover. That's kind of about what I'm thinking or figured. If you can see that, the oil pan is basically sitting on the cross member right now. That's going to be removed once I redo the front suspension. And even that may need to be notched just to make that oil pan clear to put it in here. But basically the only thing kind of the two things keeping me from sliding it back further is that steering shaft or the steering column, and then the air box up here, which you can see I can gain a few inches there too. So I already kind of have I'm going to probably trim it right here, kind of trim it back, bring it about here, you know, not all the way back, but leave about an inch or so, and then just kind of round it right to there, and redo that, and then I'll be able to shove that motor back further. Right now, as it sits, there is enough room for, I guess, the accessories or the front pulleys and stuff on a normal engine. But depending on how all this fits in here, or where the engine finally sits, they do make, Power by the Hour makes a alternator that you can reverse it right here, so it sticks out the front and the pulleys on the inside. I don't know if that would fit once I get the electric fan put in here too. It's pretty tight if I did it that way. I would love to mount the alternator down here. I don't see anyone that sells brackets for it, so I'll have to do that, you know, make my own brackets, but I think it would fit. And then if I could put the power steering pump down here, that'd be awesome. But you still have to have some way of making all that work with the serpentine belt. So either that, or, you know, the alternator gets put over here, and there's another company, I think KRZ or something, makes a power steering pump that mounts up here. And you just basically add another pulley to the water pump, I think it is, and it runs off of that, so that would sit here. That's not a bad option either. I may do that. And even if I could mount the alternator down here and that power steering pump up here and make it all work, then I wouldn't necessarily need to worry about that steering gear down there. But you have to have the right spots to mount idler pulleys and tensioners, so we'll see how that plays out. But we'll have to we'll start by pulling that steering column out and then trimming this air box so we can get it to sit back a little bit, and then down a little bit too, to clear that cross member down here. You can maybe see it a little bit there. It's just the front sump part of it, just catching that cross member, which we could trim the oil pan too, or get a custom oil pan so it fits in there better, but I'd like to go down and back a little bit yet. Exhaust manifolds, honestly, not terribly worried about them. They look like there's enough room here. The F-150, this side anyway, to where it dumps, it pretty much dumps straight down kind of, and that would work great. But the other side kind of kicks almost out towards the driver's outside, you know, or towards the door versus towards the center. That may be an issue. So I'm kind of looked at the Mustang manifolds. They might work just as good or better. Either that or I may have to make custom headers or manifolds. So still looking into that, but I think it'll work. So a little at a time here and see if we're going to get anything accomplished. See if this swap will even work. So, all right, so I got this air box notched out so we can slide the engine back to clear that passenger side valve cover. You know, it came out to roughly here before and just made it a lot bigger. There's going to be a little bit of airflow. There's not a whole lot. There's maybe an inch, if that. You can see that's about how wide it's going to be to get airflow in here. So it will restrict the airflow a fair amount, but at least there still is airflow and I can still use the heater and stuff. I even kind of, this inside part of the box, I kind of rounded that corner a little bit because it was real sharp and sticking out there. So I tried to open that up as best I can for airflow and then rounded it, you know, here, just so it's not such a deadhead. Plus that airflow has to blow across that resistor right there, the fan resistor, otherwise that's going to burn out all the time. So trying to get as much airflow as I can, but being it's such a square valve cover there, or head, kind of have to round it that way. But basically just made a template out of paper or cardboard, trimmed it to match there, and then I just transferred it over to some plastic sheeting here, kind of warmed it up and bent it to that angle, trimmed it real nice to match, and then I'll use some epoxy and glue that in there, and then once that's all dry, then probably trim it or sand it down so it's nice and smooth so it looks, you know, almost like factory, and then paint over it to match the rest of this. So that'll be the next step, gluing it on, and then while that's drying and the glue is setting up, then I'll probably remove that steering column over there. All right, I think I know what I'm going to do as far as the front drive accessories with the power steering pump and the alternator. You know, right now I do have this new Mustang front cover put on here. I don't think I'm going to use it, so I'm going to be taking it back off most likely. I don't know if I'll be able to return it or not. Otherwise I'll probably end up selling it. But everyone that I talk to pretty much is telling me any certain way I want to go with the front accessory drive, we have to put this Mustang front cover on. So that's why I had put it on, figuring I have to put it on anyway. But this alternator is going to mess me up here, so I want to put the old F-150 back on there. If I hold it up here, you can see that the F-150 sits way lower versus that one, those two bolts there, and that's where I'm running into issues. It actually moves the alternator out about 1.5 inches this way. If I hold it up here from the center line of the crank out to the outside of it where the frame rail would be, it is like 14.5 inches to the outside. On the F-150, when I measure, I'm getting about 13 to the outside. I have room for about 12.5, so I might have to notch the frame just a little bit, or I can just move the engine over that 1/2 inch to clearance. But as far as I can tell, everything on here bolts up the same. I want to mount the alternator in the factory spot, and then I'll run it up to the, run around the crank. I'll use the factory pulley or tensioner, and then it'll go back up to the water pump and then down to the alternator. So that'll be real simple. As far as power steering, I think I'm going to go with the KRC power steering pump, which mounts up here. And they even say that, yep, you have to have this Mustang front cover because, you know, these bosses are all shaved down on here. But if I use this front cover, then this moves, you know, the alternator over. So being, as far as I can tell, everything, all the bolt holes are almost all the, I mean, as far as I can tell, all identical. The only thing with the F-150 is it has this raised boss for the idler pulley. This bolt here is raised, and so is this boss here. But you look on here, they're all shaved. This one's shaved, this one's shaved, that one's shaved. So if I just take this front cover, shave these off like the Mustang front cover, I should be able to use this alternator that sits lower and closer to the center line of the crank. So, you know, the Mustang one has this. The only reason this is here is it has to redirect that belt away from the thermostat or the coolant line that goes to the radiator, just because this alternator sits up higher. So it has, being it sits up higher, it would hit that outlet for the water pump. So if that sits lower, you don't need this. The only thing that I know that the front pulley is different on the Mustang versus the F-150. The size and everything is the same, but the F-150 uses a 6-rib outer belt and then a 4-rib on the inner belt for the AC, where the Mustang, I guess, has 6 and 6. But being I'm not using any of those accessories and using all factory stuff here, I'm just going to be running the 6-rib to the water pump and to the alternator and back, and that shouldn't have changed at all. So that should all be stock. It's just a matter of bolting that KRC pump to the water pump. You change out that pulley and then it runs off the water pump, so it actually raises it or sticks out a little bit. But so if I shave all these off and mount that pump here, I should be golden, and I think, you know, that'll all work in there, and I should have room. So that kind of simplifies things for me. The KRC pump is pretty expensive for that kit. I really don't want to spend that much, but man, it's going to make just everything that much easier. All right, it's a good spot to end the video. Hopefully you guys like this content. I'm trying to do the best I can as far as go step by step through all this, and what you know, if you guys want to do this project yourself, what it's all going to take. I'm trying to make sure I get all the information, the parts I use, that sort of thing. So if there's anything that I'm missing, put a comment in the comment section, write to me, whatever, and I'll try to get back to you. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.